Hello, my name is Robert Rickover. I teach the Alexander Technique in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I live. I also teach on a regular basis in Toronto, Canada. And over the past few years, I've been doing an increasing amount of online coaching using the principles of the Alexander Technique. This is the second in a series of short videos about self-directing using Alexander Technique directions. We are working with the direction I'm free, and I asked you to run a few experiments with that in the last video. In the last video, I did emphasize that the direction you're thinking to yourself should be done very lightly, very softly. And I want to elaborate on that a little bit because what I found is that in general, people, when they're dealing with something very specific, like this direction, I'm free, have a tendency to kind of narrow in on it or put energy into thinking it. And when people, on the other hand, when people have a very general thought like, oh, what a nice day it is today, that's often delivered as a very soft message. And it's that softness that we want to take into the specific, because that's what makes a direction powerful. Power from Alexander direction comes from softness, from lightness, from not wanting to add anything to the direction. So I want to run through a very short experiment that I often do with students, which would involve you sitting in a chair somewhere in a room and gaze around the room and select an object that's an unimportant object, a boring object. I tend to use a small brown desk that sits in one corner of my teaching studio. It has nothing, there's nothing really going for it. It's a boring little desk. And just notice it. And then what I'd like you to do is stand up, take a little walk around the room. Part of the time, you probably won't even have that object in your field of vision. And as you're doing that, the standing up, walking around the room, and then sitting down again, I want you to have a little bit of an awareness of that object. Just make it slightly more in your brain than it might be if we hadn't talked about it. Chances are it's an object that you never think about much. So it's kind of something you're elevating a little bit in your awareness. You're not concentrating on it. You're not really super interested in it, but you are giving a little extra attention to it. Enough attention that, for example, if someone were to ask you a question about it, like in the case of this table, well, there's a drawer in front of the table. And someone might ask you, well, what side of the table is the drawer on? And you might know, but you might not know, but you would know exactly where to look to get the answer. It's that level of awareness we're talking about. And I find that most students are pretty good at doing that. Maybe it'll take a couple of tries, but that level of efforting to think about that object, if you're doing more efforting than that in using an Alexander direction, you're doing too much. So it's a nice little experiment to run to give you an idea of just how softly a direction should be delivered. You could also, that's a visual kind of thing, if you're an auditory person, you're out walking, you could just arbitrarily choose a certain sound among the many sounds that are out there. It could be birds chirping, could be rustling of leaves, could be some distant sound that's of no great interest to you normally. and just for a short period of time, just bring it a little more to your awareness than it might otherwise be. And again, that's the level of intent that we're after. I'll just mention another way of saying some of the same stuff that I've just said. You almost certainly have a light switch somewhere in the room. Typically, it'll be on or off. The light will be on, the light will be off, depending on what you do with the switch. And a nice way to think about that is that the on state and the off state are potentially there all the time. And all you have to do is flick the switch to get one or the other. You don't have to make any effort. You don't have to get into any detail, or you don't have to have any knowledge of the electrical system, the grid system, how bulbs work, or any of that. You just know that turn it on, turn it off. Those two choices are there. And I would say the same thing with the direction. If you have a direction that you've found to be helpful, you simply use it and it's on. And if you decide to turn it off, perhaps as part of an experiment you're running, that's all you do. You just stop using it. So maybe that analogy would be helpful. And we may come back to this business of lightness, but it's a pretty powerful thing to be able to lightly make what's actually a fairly important decision. So in the next little video, I'm going to talk about a problem that sometimes arises with using directions of a different sort. And we'll get to that in the next video.